Tycoon left his pregnant wife. 3 years later, he saw his son at a charity event. Robert raised his champagne flute, the bubbles dancing in the golden liquid. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the power couple of the hour. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert's voice carried across the room, smooth and confident. "Thank you all for joining us this evening. Your support of the Sinclair Foundation's efforts to improve education in underprivileged communities means the world to us." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at Sarah. She met his eyes, a mixture of love and nervous excitement shimmering in her own. "But tonight," Robert continued, his voice taking on an unusually tender quality that made several guests lean in closer, "we have an announcement that goes beyond business. One that fills our hearts with more joy than any corporate merger ever could." Sarah's grip on his arm tightened slightly. Robert's free hand came to rest on hers, their fingers intertwining. "Sarah and I," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "are thrilled to share that we're expecting our first child." The room erupted in applause and excited murmurs. Sarah's face broke into a radiant smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of happiness. Robert turned to her, cupping her face gently with one hand. "I love you," he whispered, just for her ears, before placing a soft kiss on her forehead. As they turned back to face their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, neither could have imagined the storm that lay ahead. For now, in this golden moment, their world was perfect, filled with promise, love, and the dream of the family they would build together. Sarah, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, sat hunched over a stack of textbooks. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed countless late nights of study. She raised her mug to her lips, savoring the bitter warmth of her third espresso. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked Robert, his suit slightly rumpled from a long day at the office. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, time stood still. "Excuse me," Robert said, approaching her table. "I couldn't help but notice the financial projections on your screen. Are you studying business?" Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his directness. "Oh, yes. I'm working on my MBA. These are actually for a case study I'm presenting tomorrow." Robert's eyes lit up with interest. "Mind if I take a look? I might be able to offer some insights." Sarah hesitated, her natural caution warring with curiosity. Finally, she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Be my guest, Mr. Sinclair." "Robert Sinclair," he said, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Sarah." "Sarah Thompson," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. As Robert sat down, neither of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would change their lives forever. They talked for hours, lost in a world of financial strategies and market trends. But beneath the business jargon, a spark had ignited, one that would lead them from opposite ends of the social spectrum to the dizzying heights of success, and ultimately, to the precipice of heartbreak. Sarah found herself drawn to Robert's sharp mind and ambition, while he was captivated by her determination and fresh perspective. As the coffee shop emptied around them, their conversation deepened, revealing shared dreams and complementary strengths. "You know," Robert said, leaning back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face, "I have a feeling this is the beginning of something extraordinary, Sarah." She smiled, a mix of excitement and trepidation fluttering in her chest. "I think you might be right, Robert." As they parted ways that night, neither could shake the sense that their lives had just taken an unexpected, thrilling turn. The stage was set for a whirlwind romance that would sweep them both off their feet, but at what cost? One crisp autumn evening, Robert paced in his lavish home office, phone pressed to his ear. Sarah watched from the doorway, her hand resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach. "Yes, Mr. Tanaka, I understand the opportunity," Robert said, his voice tense. "But surely we can negotiate the timeline." Sarah's heart sank. She knew that tone all too well. As Robert ended the call, he turned to her, his eyes alight with a familiar fire. "Sarah, you won't believe this. Tanaka Industries is offering us a partnership that could double our market share in Asia." Sarah forced a smile, trying to match his enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, darling. When do they want to start?" Robert's excitement faltered as he caught the hint of disappointment in her voice. "Well, that's the thing. They want me in Tokyo next week to begin negotiations. It could be a few months before, months. Sarah interrupted, her carefully constructed composure cracking. Robert, we just found out about the baby. We were supposed to start planning the nursery, remember? Robert ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. I know. But this deal, it's the opportunity of a lifetime. Think of what it could mean for our family's future. Sarah stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. Our family's future is right here, Robert. We're about to become parents. Doesn't that matter more than any business deal? Of course it matters, Robert insisted, squeezing her hands. But this isn't just any deal. This could secure our child's future for generations to come. Sarah pulled away, frustration building. And what about the present? What about being here for the doctor's appointments, for the first kick, for the birth? Robert's jaw tightened. Sarah, please try to understand. This is bigger than us. It's about building a legacy. A legacy? Sarah's voice rose. What good is a legacy if you're not here to share it with us? The room fell silent, the weight of their words hanging heavy in the air. Robert turned to the window, gazing out at the city skyline he had helped shape. I have to do this, he said softly, almost to himself. I can't let this opportunity slip away. Sarah watched him, a sense of dread settling in her stomach. She could see the determination in the set of his shoulders, the restless energy in his stance. It was the same drive that had first drawn her to him, but now it felt like a chasm opening between them. As Robert turned back to her, his expression a mix of resolve and pleading, Sarah realized with a chill that she might be losing him, not to another woman, but to the relentless ambition that had always been his first love. Robert, she whispered, her voice trembling, please don't do this. Don't choose your empire over your family. But even as the words left her lips, Sarah knew. The die had been cast, and the path ahead would be far more treacherous than either of them could imagine. Sarah stood by the fireplace, arms crossed protectively over her stomach. I can't believe you're really going through with this, Robert. We're supposed to be a team. Robert sighed heavily, loosening his tie. We are a team, Sarah. That's why I need you to understand. This deal could set us up for life, for our child's life. At what cost? Sarah's voice cracked. You're going to miss everything. The first ultrasound, feeling the baby kick, picking out names. Robert moved towards her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. I'll be back before you know it. We can video call, I'll fly back for the important appointments, it's not the same. Sarah exploded, tears welling in her eyes. This isn't just about appointments, Robert. It's about being present, about building a family together. How can you not see that? Robert's jaw clenched, frustration evident in every line of his body. What I see is an opportunity to give our child everything we never had. Security, the best education, a future without limitations. Isn't that what we always talked about? Sarah shook her head, her voice dropping to a whisper. We talked about being there for each other, about creating a home filled with love. What good is all the money in the world if our child grows up with an absent father? The words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Robert turned away, running a hand through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was low and strained. I'm not going to be absent, Sarah. I'm doing this for us, for our future. Why can't you support me in this? Sarah's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. Support you? I've supported you through every late night, every missed dinner, every cancelled vacation. But this is too much, Robert. You're choosing your ambition over your family. Robert spun around, his patience finally snapping. That's not fair. Everything I do for us. For our family. No, Sarah said, her voice suddenly calm and cold. You do it for yourself, Robert. For your ego, for your empire. And I'm starting to wonder if there's any room left in your heart for us at all. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at Sarah, shock and pain etched across his features. For a moment, it seemed like he might break, might finally see the damage his single-minded pursuit of success was causing. But then his expression hardened, a wall coming down behind his eyes. "I have to do this, Sarah. I'm sorry you can't understand that." As he turned and walked out of the room, Sarah felt something inside her shatter. She sank to the floor, her arms wrapped around her midsection, protecting the tiny life growing within her. "Oh, little one," she whispered through her tears, "what are we going to do?" Outside, the sound of a car engine roaring to life cut through the night. Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that nothing would ever be the same again. As Robert drove away, chasing his dreams of empire, he left behind a wife who wondered if love alone would be enough to keep their family from falling apart. Robert's finger hovered over the screen, torn between duty and desire. Just as he was about to call back, a knock at the door startled him. "Mr. Sinclair?" His assistant, James, poked his head in. "The Tanaka team is ready for you. They are waiting in the conference room." Robert nodded, straightening his tie. "I'll be right there." As he gathered his documents, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah, "First ultrasound today. Wish you were here." Attached was a grainy black and white image, their child's first picture. Robert's heart clenched, a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. For a moment, he stood frozen, staring at the image. Then, with a deep breath, he slipped the phone into his pocket and strode out of the room. Hours later, Robert returned to his suite, exhausted but exhilarated. The negotiations had gone better than he could have hoped. As he loosened his tie, he finally allowed himself to look at his phone again. 5 missed calls from Sarah. A dozen text messages. With a sigh, he dialed her number, bracing himself for the conversation to come. "Robert?" Sarah's voice was small, tired. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I know, I'm sorry," he replied, guilt gnawing at him. "The meetings ran long, and, did you see the picture?" Sarah interrupted, a note of hope in her voice. Robert swallowed hard. "I did. It's amazing, Sarah." "How did the appointment go?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "It went fine. The doctor says everything looks good." I wish you had been there, Robert." The weight of her words hung heavy between them. Robert closed his eyes, leaning against the window. "I wish I had been there too. But Sarah, you wouldn't believe the progress we've made here. This deal is going to change everything for us." "Us?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Robert, there is no us right now. You're on the other side of the world, missing the most important moments of our lives." Robert felt a flare of frustration. "I'm doing this for our future, Sarah. For our child's future. Why can't you see that?" "Because the future isn't guaranteed, Robert." Sarah's voice rose, raw with emotion. "What we have is now. This pregnancy, this baby, it's happening now. And you're missing it all." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel the chasm between them widening with each passing second. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this anymore, Robert. I can't keep pretending that your absence doesn't hurt. I can't raise this child alone while you chase your ambitions across the globe." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying, Sarah?" "I'm saying..." She paused, and Robert could hear the tears in her voice. "I'm saying that if you don't come home now, if you don't choose us over this deal, I don't know if there will be an us to come back to." The ultimatum hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down across thousands of miles. Robert's mind raced, torn between the deal of a lifetime and the family he'd always dreamed of. "Sarah, please," he began, but she cut him off. "No, Robert. It's time for you to decide what really matters. Your empire, or your family." The line went dead, leaving Robert alone in the silence of his hotel room. He stared at the phone in his hand, then at the city beyond the window. The choice before him seemed impossible, the consequences of either decision potentially devastating. As the first light of dawn began to break over Tokyo, Robert Sinclair stood at a crossroads, knowing that his next move would shape not just his future, but the lives of those he loved most. The empire he'd built or the family he was on the verge of losing, which would he choose? Tears stung her eyes as she forced herself out of bed. The house felt cavernous, every room echoing with memories of happier times. She made her way to the kitchen, her steps heavy with the weight of her new reality. As she waited for the coffee to brew, Sarah's gaze fell on the ultrasound picture pinned to the fridge. Her hand unconsciously moved to her slightly swollen belly. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The doorbell rang, startling her from her reverie. Sarah hesitated, then made her way to the front door. Opening it, she found herself face to face with her best friend, Olivia. "Oh, honey," Olivia said, taking in Sarah's tear-stained face and rumpled pajamas. Without another word, she stepped forward and enveloped Sarah in a tight hug. The dam broke. Sarah collapsed into her friend's arms, sobs racking her body. Olivia guided her to the living room couch, holding her as years of pent-up emotion poured out. "He's not coming back, Liv," Sarah choked out between sobs. "He chose the deal. He chose his ambition over us." Olivia stroked Sarah's hair, her voice soft but firm. "Then he's a fool, Sarah. A damn fool who doesn't deserve you or this baby." Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. "But how am I supposed to do this alone? I'm terrified, Liv. I don't know the first thing about being a single mother." Olivia took Sarah's hands in hers, her gaze fierce and determined. "You listen to me, Sarah Thompson. You are the strongest, most capable woman I know. You've already achieved so much on your own merit. This baby? This baby is lucky to have you as a mother, with or without Robert." Sarah managed a weak smile, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. But as she looked around the room, at the life she and Robert had built together, a fresh wave of despair washed over her. I never imagined doing this without him, Liv. We had so many plans, so many dreams for our family." Olivia squeezed her hand. "I know, sweetie. But sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. What matters now is how you move forward." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city, the same view she'd shared with Robert just days ago. But now, instead of seeing the glittering promise of their empire, she saw a world of uncertainty. "I don't even know where to start," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia joined her at the window, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You start by taking care of yourself and this baby. Everything else will fall into place." As the morning light streamed through the window, Sarah felt a tiny flutter in her belly, the first stirrings of life within her. In that moment, a spark of determination ignited in her heart. "You're right," she said, her voice growing stronger. "This baby needs me. And I need to be strong for both of us now." Olivia smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's the Sarah I know. Now, let's get you some breakfast and start making a plan. You're not alone in this, sweetie. Not by a long shot." As they moved to the kitchen, Sarah cast one last glance at the ultrasound picture. The pain of Robert's absence still ached like an open wound, but alongside it, a new feeling was taking root, a fierce, protective love for the child growing within her. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn baby. "I promise you, we're going to be okay." The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles Sarah had never anticipated. But as she stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the love and support of her friend, she felt the first stirrings of hope. This wasn't the end of her story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write on her own terms. The hospital room was a whirlwind of activity. Nurses bustled about, machines beeped steadily, and Sarah's labored breathing filled the air. Olivia stood by her side, holding her hand tightly. "You're doing great, Sarah," Olivia encouraged, wiping sweat from her friend's brow. "Just a little more." Sarah gritted her teeth, pushing with all her might. The pain was excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the ache in her heart. In this moment of ultimate vulnerability, Robert's absence felt more pronounced than ever. "I can't," Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this alone." The doctor looked up from his position at the foot of the bed. "You're not alone, Miss Thompson. We're all here with you. Now, one more big push." Sarah closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. As she pushed, memories flashed through her mind: the day she met Robert, their whirlwind romance, the dreams they'd shared. Then, just as quickly, she saw the future she was fighting for, a future where she and her child would thrive, with or without Robert. With a final, primal scream, Sarah gave one last monumental push. Suddenly, the room filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. Sarah collapsed back onto the pillows, exhausted but overwhelmed with emotion. As the nurses cleaned and wrapped her son, she felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. "You did it, Sarah," Olivia whispered, tears in her eyes. "You're a mom." The nurse approached, cradling the tiny bundle. "Here's your son, Miss Thompson." With trembling arms, Sarah reached out and took her baby boy. As she gazed into his tiny face, she saw echoes of Robert: the shape of his nose, the curve of his chin. For a moment, the pain of Robert's absence threatened to overwhelm her. But then, the baby opened his eyes, looking directly at Sarah. In that instant, everything else faded away. This was her son, her flesh and blood, and he needed her more than anything in the world. "Hello, Michael," Sarah whispered, the name she and Robert had once chosen together falling from her lips. "I'm your mommy, and I promise I will always be here for you." As if in response, Michael's tiny hand wrapped around Sarah's finger, holding on tight. In that moment, Sarah felt a strength she never knew she possessed. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it head-on. Olivia leaned in, smiling at the newborn. "He's perfect, Sarah." "Absolutely perfect." Sarah nodded, unable to take her eyes off her son. "He is. And we're going to be okay, Liv. Better than okay." As she held Michael close, Sarah made a silent vow. She would give this child all the love, support, and opportunities she could. She would be both mother and father, provider and protector. And one day, when Michael asked about his father, she would find the strength to tell him the truth, not with bitterness, but with honesty and compassion. The first rays of dawn began to peek through the hospital window, casting a golden glow over mother and child. It was a new day, the first day of their life together. And though the future was uncertain, Sarah felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Michael drifted off to sleep in her arms, Sarah whispered, "It's just you and me now, little one. But don't worry, we've got this." The journey of single motherhood was just beginning, but in that quiet hospital room, cradling her newborn son, Sarah Thompson felt like the strongest woman in the world. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him. Robert turned, his heart racing as he saw the caller ID, Olivia. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Olivia?" His voice was hoarse, betraying the emotion he tried to hide. "She had the baby, Robert." Olivia's voice was a mix of joy and accusation. "A beautiful baby boy. Your son." Robert's knees weakened, and he gripped the edge of his desk for support. Is Sarah okay?" "The baby?" "They are both fine," Olivia replied, her tone softening slightly. "No thanks to you." The words stung, but Robert knew he deserved them. "What's his name?" he asked, barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Michael," Olivia finally said. She named him Michael. Robert closed his eyes, a wave of emotion washing over him. Michael, the name he and Sarah had chosen together, what felt like a lifetime ago. "Robert," Olivia's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you coming home?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Robert looked around his office at the trappings of his success, awards, contracts, the view of a city he had conquered. Then his gaze fell on a small frame on his desk, face down. With trembling hands, he picked it up. It was the ultrasound picture Sarah had sent him months ago. He had kept it hidden, unable to face the reality of what he had left behind. Robert's voice cracked. I don't know if I can, Olivia. The deal, it's almost finalized. Everything I've worked for is within reach. Olivia's reply was sharp. And what about everything you've lost, Robert? Your wife, your child, are they worth less than your ambition? Robert felt the weight of his choices crushing down on him. It's not that simple, he argued weakly. It is that simple, Olivia countered. You're a father now, Robert. Whether you choose to act like one or not. As the call ended, Robert sank into his chair, the ultrasound picture clutched in his hand. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to truly feel the magnitude of what he had done. He had missed the birth of his son. He had left Sarah to face pregnancy and motherhood alone. All for what? A bigger office? A higher profit margin? Robert's gaze drifted to the window again, but this time, the glittering cityscape seemed cold and hollow. In his mind's eye, he saw Sarah cradling their newborn son, Michael opening his eyes for the first time, tiny fingers grasping for a father who wasn't there. A sob escaped his throat, the first crack in the facade he had maintained for months. Robert Sinclair, the titan of industry, the man who had sacrificed everything for success, finally allowed himself to weep. As the first light of dawn broke over Tokyo, Robert faced the hardest decision of his life. The empire he had built beckoned, promising even greater heights of success. But the family he had abandoned called to him with a power he could no longer ignore. In the quiet of his office, surrounded by the trappings of his ambition, Robert Sinclair began to realize that the true measure of a man lay not in the empires he built, but in the love he cherished and protected. The question remained, was it too late to make things right? And if he chose to try, would Sarah and Michael even want him back in their lives? As the sun rose, casting long shadows across his office, Robert knew that whatever choice he made next would define not just his future, but the kind of man and father he would be for the rest of his life. Careful not to disturb Michael, she reached for her device. It was an email from her old boss at the investment firm where she'd worked before marrying Robert. Sarah's heart raced as she read the message. Sarah, I hope this email finds you well. We've been following your work with the local charities, and I must say, I'm impressed. There's an opening for a senior financial analyst position, and I immediately thought of you. Are you interested in discussing this opportunity? Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities. She looked down at Michael, peacefully sleeping in her arms, and then around the nursery filled with reminders of the life she once shared with Robert. What do you think, little one? She whispered to her sleeping son. Should mommy go back to work? As if in response, Michael stirred slightly, his tiny hand grasping her finger. Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of determination. The next morning, Sarah called her former boss, Julia. Sarah, it's wonderful to hear from you. Julia's warm voice came through the speaker. Thank you for reaching out, Julia, Sarah replied, trying to keep the nervousness from her voice. I have to admit, I'm intrigued by the opportunity. I'm glad to hear it, Julia said. We've missed your sharp mind and innovative approaches. But I understand your situation has changed. How old is your little one now? Sarah glanced at Michael, happily playing in his bouncer. He's 4 months old. And yes, things have certainly changed. There was a pause before Julia continued, her voice softening. Sarah, I want you to know that we're prepared to offer flexibility. Part-time hours, work-from-home options, whatever you need to balance your career and motherhood. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. This was the understanding and support she had longed for but never received from Robert. That means a lot, Julia. Thank you. As they discussed the details of the position, Sarah felt a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in months. This was a chance to reclaim a part of herself, to show Michael that his mother was strong, capable, and determined. After ending the call, Sarah picked up Michael, holding him close. What do you say, sweetheart? Are you ready for mommy to change the world? Michael gurgled happily, his bright eyes fixed on Sarah's face. In that moment, she knew she had made the right decision. Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparations. She arranged childcare, updated her wardrobe, and brushed up on the latest financial trends. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of her identity. On the morning of her first day back at work, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blazer. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her, confident, professional, and ready to take on the world. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "For yourself, and for Michael." As she picked up her briefcase and headed for the door, Sarah paused by the crib where Michael slept peacefully. She leaned down, placing a gentle kiss on his forehead. "Mommy will be home soon, little one. I'm doing this for us." Stepping out into the crisp morning air, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt truly alive. This was more than just a job, it was a declaration of independence, a chance to build a future on her own terms. As she drove towards the city skyline, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what Robert would think if he could see her now. Would he be proud? Regretful? Or would he even recognize the strong, independent woman she had become? Pushing those thoughts aside, Sarah focused on the road ahead. Whatever challenges lay in store, she was ready to face them head-on. For herself, for Michael, and for the bright future they would build together, with or without Robert Sinclair. "Mommy, can I wear my superhero cape today?" Michael asked, his big brown eyes pleading. Sarah smiled, her heart melting at the sight of her son. "Not today, sweetheart. But how about we put it on when we get home? You can be my little superhero then." As she helped Michael with his shoes, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was a far cry from the broken-hearted expectant mother she had been 3 years ago. Her eyes now held a determined gleam, and there was a confident set to her shoulders that spoke of hard-won independence. "All ready, big guy?" Sarah asked, ruffling Michael's hair. "Ready," he chirped, grabbing his backpack. As they walked hand-in-hand to the preschool, Sarah's mind wandered to the upcoming charity gala she was organizing. It was her biggest project yet, a culmination of her work with the local Children's Foundation. "Ms. Thompson." Michael's teacher, Miss Chen, greeted them at the preschool entrance. "Don't forget, we have that parent-teacher conference tomorrow." Sarah nodded. "Of course, I've got it on my calendar. See you then." Kneeling down, she gave Michael a big hug. "Have a great day, sweetie. I love you." "Love you too, Mommy," Michael said, planting a sloppy kiss on her cheek before running off to join his friends. As Sarah watched him go, a familiar ache tugged at her heart. Michael was growing up so fast, and there were moments when she caught glimpses of Robert in his mannerisms or expressions. It was in these moments that the weight of single parenthood felt heaviest. Walking to her car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. "Hey Superwoman, lunch today? Got some news to share." Sarah smiled, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. She quickly typed back a confirmation before heading to the office. The day flew by in a whirlwind of meetings and phone calls. As Sarah left for her lunch date with Olivia, her assistant caught her attention. "Ms. Thompson, there's been a last-minute addition to the guest list for the gala. The CEO of Tycoon Industries wants to attend." Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. Tycoon Industries, the company that had lured Robert away all those years ago. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Thank you, Jenny. Please add them to the list." As she drove to meet Olivia, Sarah's mind raced. She had worked hard to build a new life for herself and Michael, one that didn't revolve around the ghost of Robert Sinclair. But now, with this unexpected connection to her past resurfacing, she couldn't help but wonder, was the universe trying to tell her something? Pushing the thought aside, Sarah entered the restaurant, spotting Olivia waving from a corner table. "There's my favorite power mom," Olivia exclaimed, standing to hug her friend. As they settled into their seats, Sarah couldn't help but notice an extra sparkle in Olivia's eyes. "All right, spill it," Sarah said with a grin. "What's this big news you couldn't wait to share?" Olivia beamed, holding out her left hand to reveal a glittering diamond ring. "Tom proposed last night." Sarah gasped, genuinely thrilled for her friend. "Oh, Liv? That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both." As they celebrated Olivia's engagement, Sarah felt a mix of joy and a twinge of something else, not quite envy, but a wistfulness for the life she once thought she'd have. "Sarah?" Olivia's voice brought her back to the present. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. Just thinking about how much you deserve this happiness." Olivia reached across the table, squeezing Sarah's hand. "You know, you deserve happiness too. Have you thought about maybe dating again?" Sarah sighed, shaking her head. "Between work and Michael, I barely have time to breathe, let alone date. Besides, I'm happy with my life as it is." But even as she said the words, Sarah wasn't entirely sure she believed them. The upcoming gala, the unexpected connection to Tanaka Industries, Olivia's engagement, it all seemed to be conspiring to remind her of the life she'd left behind. As they finished their lunch, Sarah hugged Olivia tightly, genuinely happy for her friend's joy. But as she walked back to her car, a nagging question lingered in her mind. Was she truly content with the life she'd built, or was she just afraid to open her heart again? And with the gala approaching, bringing with it echoes of her past, would she be forced to confront the feelings she'd buried for so long? Sarah took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders as she got into her car. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on, for herself, and for Michael. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Sarah Thompson was no longer the woman Robert Sinclair had left behind. She was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever life had in store. His phone buzzed on the nearby table. Another congratulatory message about the Tanaka deal, no doubt. Robert ignored it, his gaze fixed on a small, worn photograph he held in his other hand. It was the ultrasound picture of Michael, the only image he had of his son. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking with emotion. A knock at the door startled him from his reverie. "Mr. Sinclair?" His assistant's voice called out. "The board is waiting for you in the conference room." Robert cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. "I'll be right there, Akiko." He moved to put the ultrasound picture back in his desk drawer, but hesitated. Instead, he slipped it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. In the conference room, faces beamed at him as he entered. Mr. Tanaka himself stood to greet Robert with a bow. "Mr. Sinclair, congratulations on finalizing the merger. This is a historic day for both our companies." Robert nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. As the meeting progressed, he found his mind wandering. While his colleagues discussed profit margins and market expansion, all Robert could think about was the life he'd left behind. "Mr. Sinclair?" Mr. Tanaka's voice cut through his thoughts. "Your input on the new American branch?" Robert blinked, realizing all eyes were on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. In that moment, the emptiness that had been gnawing at him for years finally overwhelmed him. I can't do this anymore," he said softly, shocking everyone in the room. Mr. Tanaka leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "Mr. Sinclair, are you feeling unwell?" Robert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm sorry, gentlemen. I've made a terrible mistake, and it's time I rectified it." As he strode out of the room, ignoring the confused calls of his colleagues, Robert felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Back in his office, he found Akiko waiting, worry evident in her eyes. "Sir, is everything all right?" "The board is in an uproar." Robert met her gaze, a determined glint in his eye. "Akiko, I need you to book me on the next flight to New York. And find out everything you can about Sarah Thompson and her son, Michael." Akiko's eyes widened in recognition. She had been with Robert long enough to know the significance of those names. "Of course, sir. But what about the merger? The press conference?" Robert paused at the door, looking back at the empire he'd built. "Some things are more important than business, Akiko. I just wish I'd realized it sooner." As he walked out of the office that had been his home for the past 3 years, Robert felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. He had no idea if Sarah would even speak to him, let alone allow him back into their lives. But he knew he had to try. In the elevator, he pulled out the ultrasound picture, tracing the outline of the tiny form that was now a 3-year-old boy he'd never met. "I'm coming home, Michael," he whispered. "I just hope it's not too late." As the elevator descended, Robert Sinclair, the man who had sacrificed everything for success, felt the first stirrings of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges he couldn't even imagine. But for the first time in years, he felt alive, driven by something more powerful than ambition: love. The empire he'd built might crumble, his reputation in tatters. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the chance, however small, to make things right with the family he'd abandoned. As he stepped out onto the bustling Tokyo street, Robert took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. A new day was dawning, not just for the city, but for Robert Sinclair. Whether it would bring redemption or heartbreak remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. "Sarah, darling, you've outdone yourself this year," exclaimed Mrs. Vanderbilt, kissing Sarah's cheeks. "The decorations are simply divine." Sarah beamed, her eyes scanning the room with pride. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over tables adorned with elegant floral centerpieces. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their melodies weaving through the gentle hum of conversation. "Thank you, Mrs. Vanderbilt. We're hoping to raise even more for the children's programs this year," Sarah replied, her voice filled with genuine passion. As she guided Mrs. Vanderbilt towards the bar, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a nearby mirror. The woman staring back at her exuded confidence in a sleek emerald gown, her hair swept up in an elegant updo. It was a far cry from the heartbroken, pregnant woman she had been 3 years ago. "Miss Thompson?" A young assistant appeared at her elbow. "The silent auction is ready for your final approval." Sarah nodded. "I'll be right there, Amy." As she made her way across the ballroom, Sarah's mind wandered to Michael. She had tucked him in early tonight, promising extra pancakes in the morning to make up for her absence. The memory of his sleepy smile tugged at her heart. "Focus, Sarah," she muttered to herself. "Tonight is too important to get distracted." She had just finished reviewing the auction items when a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. Curious murmurs rippled through the crowd, heads turning towards the door. "Is that? It can't be. What's he doing here?" Sarah's heart began to race, a sense of foreboding washing over her. She turned slowly, her eyes widening in disbelief as she caught sight of the figure striding into the ballroom. Robert Sinclair, looking every bit the Tycoon in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The music faded away, the chatter of the guests became a distant hum. All Sarah could hear was the pounding of her own heart as Robert's gaze finally landed on her. Their eyes locked across the crowded room, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them in that single, electric moment. Sarah felt rooted to the spot, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Anger, hurt, confusion, and something else, a flicker of the love she had tried so hard to bury, all warred within her. Robert took a step towards her, his face a mixture of determination and uncertainty. But before he could reach her, Olivia appeared at Sarah's side, her voice low and urgent. "Sarah? Are you okay? Do you want me to have security remove him?" The question snapped Sarah back to reality. She took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "No," she said, surprising even herself with the steadiness of her voice. "No, it's all right. I can handle this." Olivia squeezed her arm supportively. "I'll be right here if you need me." As Robert drew closer, Sarah could see the years etched on his face, lines of stress and, perhaps, regret that hadn't been there before. He stopped a few feet away from her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. "You look incredible." Sarah swallowed hard, fighting to keep her composure. "Robert," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." A flicker of pain crossed Robert's face at her coolness. "I know. I'm sorry for showing up like this." I needed to see you." The vulnerability in his voice threatened to crack Sarah's carefully constructed walls. But the memory of sleepless nights, of Michael's questions about his absent father, steeled her resolve. "Why now, Robert?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why, after all this time?" Robert opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, they were interrupted by the clinking of a glass. The MC was calling for everyone's attention, announcing the start of the evening's program. Sarah turned back to Robert, conflict clear in her eyes. "I have to go. I'm supposed to give a speech." Robert nodded, understanding. "Of course. But Sarah, please, can we talk later? There's so much I need to tell you." For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to run, to protect herself and Michael from the pain Robert's reappearance could bring. But a small voice inside her, one she thought she had silenced long ago, whispered of second chances and unfinished stories. "Fine," she said finally. "After the speeches. Meet me on the terrace." As Sarah made her way to the stage, her mind reeling from the unexpected turn of events, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change once again. For better or worse, Robert Sinclair had re-entered her life, and nothing would ever be the same. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped up to the microphone, ready to address the crowd. But as she began to speak about hope and new beginnings, she couldn't help but wonder, was she talking about the Children's Foundation, or about her own life? The night stretched before her, full of possibility and peril. And on a terrace overlooking the glittering New York skyline, a conversation awaited that had the power to heal old wounds or open new ones. The story of Sarah and Robert, it seemed, was far from over. She heard the soft footsteps behind her before his voice broke the silence. "Sarah." She turned slowly, facing the man who had once been her whole world. Robert stood there, his usually confident demeanor replaced by an air of uncertainty. The years had been kind to him physically, but Sarah could see the weight of regret in his eyes. "Why are you here, Robert?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer, his hands fidgeting at his sides. I had to see you. To explain. To apologize." Sarah felt a surge of anger rise within her. "Apologize? It's been 3 years, Robert. 3 years of silence." Robert's face contorted with pain. "I know. And there's no excuse for that. But Sarah, I've realized what a terrible mistake I made. Leaving you, our child, it's been eating me alive." Sarah turned away, gripping the terrace railing tightly. "Do you have any idea what it's been like? Raising our son alone? Watching him grow, wondering if he'd ever know his father?" "Our son," Robert repeated softly, his voice filled with longing. "Michael. How is he?" Sarah's resolve wavered at the genuine emotion in Robert's voice. She turned back to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "He's amazing," she said. "Smart, kind, curious about everything. He has your eyes, you know." Robert's breath caught audibly. "I'd love to meet him, Sarah. If you'd allow it." The request hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Sarah's mind raced, torn between protecting her son from potential heartbreak and the desire to give him the chance to know his father. "I don't know, Robert," she said finally. "You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be okay. You hurt us. Deeply." Robert nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends if you let me. Sarah, I've realized that all the success, all the money in the world, it means nothing without you and Michael." Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. The raw sincerity in Robert's voice was impossible to ignore. "What about your empire?" she asked. "Your life in Tokyo?" Robert shook his head. "I've left it all behind. None of it matters anymore. I want to be here, to be a father to Michael, to see if there's any chance you could forgive me." Sarah's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. The hurt and anger of the past 3 years warred with the undeniable spark that still existed between them. It's not that simple, Robert, she said softly. We've built a life without you. Michael and I, we're happy. Robert's face fell, but he nodded in understanding. I know. And I would never want to disrupt that. But Sarah, if there's even the smallest chance, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust again, to be a part of Michael's life. Even if it's just as a friend. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Sarah. She found herself remembering the man she had fallen in love with, the dreams they had shared. I can't make any promises, Robert, she said finally. But maybe we can start small. A meeting, supervised. Let you and Michael get to know each other. Hope bloomed in Robert's eyes. Really? Sarah, that would mean everything to me. As they stood there on the terrace, the city lights twinkling around them, Sarah felt a shift in the air. The future, which had seemed so certain just hours ago, now stretched before her filled with new possibilities. This doesn't mean I forgive you, she said firmly. Not yet. But it's a start. Robert nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. A start is all I ask for. Thank you, Sarah. As they turned to go back inside, Sarah caught a glimpse of their reflection in the terrace doors. For a moment, she saw not just who they were now, but who they had been and who they might become. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential for both joy and heartache. But as she watched Robert's retreating figure, Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, hope. Whether it was hope for reconciliation, for closure, or for something entirely new, she couldn't say. But as she rejoined the gala, her mind already racing with thoughts of how to tell Michael about this unexpected development, Sarah knew one thing for certain. The story of their family, which she had thought long finished, was about to begin a new chapter. And this time, she was determined to write it on her own terms. Mommy, they ready yet? Michael called out, his voice filled with childish impatience. Sarah smiled, flipping a golden brown pancake onto a plate. Almost, sweetheart. Why don't you come set the table? As Michael scampered into the kitchen, Sarah's heart clenched. How could she possibly explain to her 3-year-old son that his father, a man he had never met, suddenly wanted to be part of their lives? Here you go, my little helper, Sarah said, handing Michael the plastic plates and cups. She watched as he carefully arranged them on the table, his little tongue poking out in concentration. Michael, Sarah began, her voice gentle, there's something important Mommy needs to talk to you about. Michael looked up, his brown eyes so like Robert's, wide with curiosity. Is it about the pancakes? Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. No, sweetie. It's about your daddy. Michael's eyes grew even wider. My daddy? The one in the picture? Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had always kept a photo of Robert in Michael's room, wanting her son to at least know what his father looked like. Yes, that's right. You see, your daddy, he's come back. And he'd like to meet you. Michael's face scrunched up in confusion. But why didn't he want to meet me before? The innocent question hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She knelt down, meeting Michael's gaze. Oh, sweetheart, she said, fighting back tears. It's complicated. Your daddy, he made some mistakes. But he wants to make things right now. Michael pondered this for a moment, his little brow furrowed. Is he nice? Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to speak ill of Robert to their son. Yes, he's nice, she said softly. And he wants very much to get to know you. Michael's face lit up with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Can I see him today? Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. Not today, honey. But soon. We're going to take things slow, okay? Make sure everything is good for all of us. As she helped Michael into his chair and placed a stack of pancakes in front of him, Sarah's phone buzzed. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Robert's name on the screen. Good morning, Sarah. I hope I'm not calling too early. I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation last night. About Michael. I was wondering if we could set up that meeting soon. Sarah glanced at Michael, happily munching on his breakfast, blissfully unaware of the life-changing events unfolding around him. Robert, she said quietly, stepping into the living room, I've just told Michael about you. He's excited to meet you. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. He is? Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful. When do you think? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. This weekend, perhaps? There's a park near our apartment. I thought maybe we could meet there, keep things casual. Yes, absolutely, Robert replied, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah, thank you. I know this isn't easy for you. As she ended the call, Sarah leaned against the wall, her mind whirling. The prospect of seeing Robert again, of watching him meet their son for the first time, filled her with a mix of anticipation and dread. Mommy? Michael's voice called from the kitchen. Can I have more syrup, please? Sarah took a deep breath, plastering a smile on her face as she returned to the kitchen. Of course, sweetie. Here you go. As she watched Michael happily drench his pancakes in syrup, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain, her love for Michael would guide her through. The weekend loomed ahead, promising a reunion that would change all their lives forever. As Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee, she couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of a new chapter for their family, or would Robert's return only bring more heartache? Only time would tell. But for now, in the warmth of their cozy kitchen, with the sound of Michael's laughter filling the air, Sarah allowed herself to hope just a little that maybe, just maybe, everything would work out in the end. Mommy, is he here yet? Michael asked, bouncing on his toes, a mix of excitement and nervousness in his voice. Sarah knelt down, smoothing Michael's unruly hair. Not yet, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about? Daddy might be a little nervous too, so let's be patient, okay? Michael nodded solemnly, his brown eyes wide. Okay, Mommy. Can I go play on the swings while we wait? Sarah hesitated, torn between keeping Michael close and allowing him a distraction. All right, but stay where I can see you. As Michael scampered off towards the playground, Sarah's eyes returned to the path. And then, suddenly, there he was. Robert appeared around the bend, looking simultaneously familiar and like a stranger. Gone was the polished business tycoon. Instead, he wore jeans and a casual sweater, his hair slightly tousled by the wind. As their eyes met, Sarah felt a jolt of electricity course through her. Robert approached slowly, his face a mixture of hope and trepidation. Sarah, he said softly, coming to a stop a few feet away. Thank you for this. Sarah nodded, unable to find words for a moment. Finally, she managed, he's on the swings. Are you ready? Robert took a deep breath, his gaze moving to the playground. As ready as I'll ever be, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Together, they walked towards the swings. Michael, spotting them, jumped off mid-swing and ran towards them, stopping short when he saw Robert. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Robert stared at Michael, drinking in every detail of the son he'd never met. Michael, for his part, looked up at Robert with wide-eyed curiosity. Michael, Sarah said gently, this is your daddy. Robert knelt down, bringing himself to Michael's eye level. Hello, Michael, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so happy to meet you. Michael tilted his head, studying Robert's face. Then, in a move that took both adults by surprise, he reached out and touched Robert's cheek. You look like me, Michael said matter-of-factly. Robert laughed, a sound filled with both joy and unshed tears. Yes, I suppose I do. Sarah watched the interaction, her heart a tumult of conflicting emotions. The sight of Robert and Michael together, the undeniable connection between them, was both beautiful and painful. Daddy, do you want to push me on the swings? Michael asked suddenly, his initial shyness evaporating. Robert glanced at Sarah, seeking permission. She nodded, unable to deny the hope in both their eyes. As Robert followed Michael to the swings, Sarah sank onto a nearby bench, her legs suddenly weak. She watched as Robert awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence, pushed Michael higher and higher, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It was a scene she had imagined countless times over the years, a dream she had long since given up on. And yet, here it was, playing out before her eyes. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" Michael's delighted squeals filled the air. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. The joy on Michael's face was undeniable, as was the look of pure wonder on Robert's. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where this could be their normal family outings, shared laughter, the three of them together. But as quickly as the thought came, doubt crept in. Could she trust Robert not to disappear again? Could she risk Michael's heart, not to mention her own? As if sensing her turmoil, Robert looked over at her, their eyes locking across the playground. In that moment, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them: regret, hope, fear, and something else, something that neither of them was quite ready to name. The afternoon stretched on, filled with playground adventures and cautious conversations. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Sarah knew it was time to bring this first meeting to a close. "Michael, sweetie, it's time to go home," she called out. Michael's face fell, and he turned to Robert with pleading eyes. "Can't Daddy come with us?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Sarah felt her heart constrict as she watched Robert struggle with how to respond. "Not today, buddy," Robert said gently, kneeling down to Michael's level. "But I promise we'll see each other again soon, okay?" Michael nodded, then surprised everyone by throwing his arms around Robert's neck in a tight hug. "Bye, Daddy. I'm glad you came back." As they parted ways, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The future, which had seemed so certain just days ago, now stretched before her, filled with new possibilities and potential pitfalls. Walking home, Michael's small hand in hers, Sarah's mind raced with unanswered questions. Could she allow Robert back into their lives? Could she trust him with her heart and, more importantly, with Michael's? And if she did, what would it mean for the life she had so carefully built for herself and her son? The answers weren't clear, but as she looked down at Michael's smiling face, still excited from meeting his father, Sarah knew one thing for certain: the journey ahead would be anything but simple. One crisp evening, as Sarah tucked Michael into bed, he looked up at her with those big brown eyes that always seemed to see right through her. "Mommy," he said softly, "is Daddy going to live with us now?" Sarah's heart clenched. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing Michael's hair. "No, sweetheart. Daddy has his own place. But he'll visit us, remember?" Michael's brow furrowed. "But why can't he stay here? Don't you love him anymore?" The innocent question hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "It's complicated, honey. Sometimes grown-ups, they need time to figure things out." "But you always say we should forgive people," Michael persisted, his voice small but insistent. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You're right, I do say that. And I'm trying, Michael. I really am. It's just not always easy." As she kissed Michael goodnight and left his room, Sarah's mind was in turmoil. She made her way to the living room, sinking onto the couch with a heavy sigh. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert: "Had a great time with Michael at the museum today. He's so bright, Sarah. You've done an amazing job with him." Sarah's thumb hovered over the reply button, her heart racing. The past few weeks had been a rollercoaster. Robert had been true to his word, showing up consistently for visits with Michael, never pushing for more than Sarah was willing to give. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was Michael's questions, or maybe it was the cumulative effect of seeing Robert with their son, but Sarah felt a crack forming in the wall she'd built around her heart. Before she could overthink it, she typed out a reply: "Thank you. Listen, can we talk? There's a cafe near my office. Tomorrow at lunch?" Robert's response was almost immediate: "Absolutely. Name the time and place. I'll be there." As Sarah set her phone down, she felt a mix of anticipation and dread. She knew this conversation could change everything again. The next day, Sarah found herself sitting in a cozy corner of the cafe, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She watched the door nervously, her heart skipping a beat when Robert walked in. He spotted her immediately, making his way over with a tentative smile. "Sarah, thank you for meeting me." As he sat down across from her, Sarah was struck by how different he looked from the man who had left her 3 years ago. The sharp edges of the ruthless businessman had softened, replaced by something more human. "Robert," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to know. What exactly are you hoping for here? With Michael, with us?" Robert's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Honestly? Everything, Sarah. I want to be a father to Michael. I want to make up for all the time I've lost. And you?" He paused, taking a deep breath. "I know I have no right to ask, but I can't help but hope that maybe, someday, you might be able to forgive me. To give us another chance." Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "It's not that simple, Robert. You hurt us. Deeply. How can I trust that you won't do it again?" Robert reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "I know words aren't enough. But Sarah, leaving you and Michael was the biggest mistake of my life. I've spent every day since then regretting it. I'm not asking for instant forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove myself, to show you and Michael that I can be the man, the father, you both deserve." Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of the old Robert, the man who had chosen ambition over family. But all she saw was sincerity, regret, and a love that took her breath away. "I'm scared, Robert," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Not just for myself, but for Michael. He's so happy to have you in his life now. If you leave again..." Robert's hand finally covered hers, warm and reassuring. "I won't. I swear to you, Sarah. I'm here for good, for as long as you and Michael will have me." As they sat there, hands intertwined across the table, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The future, which had seemed so uncertain, suddenly held a glimmer of hope. "Okay," she said softly, surprising even herself. Let's take it slow. See where this goes." Robert's face lit up with a joy that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "That's all I ask for, Sarah. A chance." As they left the cafe, stepping out into the bustling New York street, Sarah felt as though she was standing on the precipice of something both terrifying and exhilarating. The road ahead was far from clear, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where their broken family might be whole again. Only time would tell if Robert could truly make amends, if the wounds of the past could heal. But as Sarah watched him hail a cab, turning to give her one last smile before he left, she felt a flutter of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. The story of their family, it seemed, was far from over. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with potential for both heartache and joy. And Sarah, despite her fears, found herself ready to turn the page. "Mommy, can Daddy come to our Christmas party?" Michael asked one evening as they decorated their small tree, his eyes shining with hope. Sarah's hand stilled on the ornament she was hanging. The annual Christmas Eve gathering had been a tradition she'd started after Robert left, a way to create new memories and fill the void his absence had left. The thought of including him in this sacred space sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. I'm not sure, sweetheart," she replied, buying time. "I'll have to think about it." Later that night, after Michael was tucked in bed, Sarah found herself staring at her phone, Robert's number on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Taking a deep breath, she pressed call. "Sarah?" Robert's voice came through, a mix of surprise and pleasure. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's fine," she said, her voice slightly shaky. Michael asked if you could come to our Christmas Eve party." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Robert spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "And how do you feel about that?" Sarah closed her eyes, leaning back against the couch. I don't know, Robert. It's been our thing, just Michael and me and a few close friends. It's sacred, Robert finished for her, understanding in his tone. I get it, Sarah. I don't want to intrude on your traditions. His consideration touched something deep within her. Before she could second-guess herself, Sarah heard herself say, but maybe it's time for new traditions. If you'd like to come, you're welcome. The silence that followed was loaded with emotion. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was thick. I'd be honored, Sarah. Thank you. As she ended the call, Sarah felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. This was a big step, one that could change everything. Christmas Eve arrived in a flurry of snow and twinkling lights. Sarah's apartment was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of mulled wine and the sound of cheerful conversation. Michael, decked out in his favorite reindeer sweater, was practically vibrating with excitement. The doorbell rang, and Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. She opened the door to find Robert standing there, a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a stack of presents in the other. "Merry Christmas," he said softly, his eyes taking in the scene behind her. As Robert stepped inside, the room seemed to hold its breath. Olivia, who had been chatting with other guests, fell silent. All eyes were on the man who had left and then returned, now standing in the midst of the life Sarah had built without him. Michael broke the tension, running up to Robert with a joyful cry. "Daddy! You came!" Robert knelt down, enveloping Michael in a hug. "Of course I did, buddy. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Sarah watched the interaction, her heart a tangle of emotions. Seeing Robert here, in the home they once shared, felt surreal. Yet, as she observed him mingling with her friends, laughing at Michael's jokes and helping to serve dessert, she couldn't deny how right it felt. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself standing by the window, watching the snow fall outside. Robert approached, 2 mugs of mulled wine in hand. "Thank you for including me tonight," he said quietly, offering her a mug. "It means more than you know." Sarah took the mug, their fingers brushing in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm glad you came," she admitted. "It feels complete, somehow." Robert's eyes met hers, filled with warmth and something more. "Sarah, I know we've been taking things slow, and I respect that. But being here tonight, with you and Michael, it's everything I've ever wanted. Everything I foolishly walked away from." Sarah felt her breath catch. "Robert." He gently took her free hand in his. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just want you to know that I'm all in. Whatever you decide, whatever pace you want to set, I'm here for both of you." As they stood there, the soft glow of Christmas lights illuminating their faces, Sarah felt the last of her reservations melting away. She looked over at Michael, happily playing with his new toys, then back at Robert. "Maybe," she said softly, "it's time to start a new chapter. Together." Robert's face lit up with a joy that made Sarah's heart soar. As he leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a gentle, tentative kiss, Sarah felt as though she were coming home after a long journey. The future was still uncertain, full of challenges they had yet to face. But as they stood there, surrounded by friends and family, with Michael's laughter filling the air, Sarah knew one thing for certain: their story was far from over. In fact, the most beautiful chapters might just be waiting to be written. As the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the city in a peaceful white, the little apartment on the Upper West Side glowed with the warmth of love rediscovered and a family reunited. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for Sarah, Robert, and Michael, it was the beginning of a new adventure, one they would face together. One sunny Saturday morning, Sarah awoke to the sound of muffled laughter coming from the kitchen. She padded quietly down the hallway, pausing at the entrance to take in the scene before her. Robert stood at the stove, his hair tousled and wearing the "world's best dad" apron Michael had given him for his birthday. Michael was perched on a stool beside him, his little face scrunched in concentration as he carefully stirred a bowl of pancake batter. "Easy there, chef," Robert chuckled, steadying Michael's hand. "We don't want to spill it all over the counter." "I'm being careful, Daddy," Michael insisted, his tongue poking out in concentration. Sarah felt her heart swell with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was joy, certainly, but tinged with a bittersweet ache for all the moments like this they had missed. As if sensing her presence, Robert looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Good morning, sleepyhead. We were trying to surprise you with breakfast in bed." Sarah stepped into the kitchen, ruffling Michael's hair as she passed. "Well, consider me surprised. And very, very hungry." As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Michael's excited chatter about the upcoming school play. Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how natural it all felt, how quickly they had fallen into this domestic rhythm. "So," Robert said, clearing his throat as they finished eating, "I've been thinking." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "Oh? About what?" Robert reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "About us. This. I know we've been taking things slow, rebuilding our relationship step by step. But Sarah, these past few months have been the happiest of my life. Being here with you and Michael, it's everything I ever wanted and more." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She could see where this was going, and a part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But the larger part, the part that had grown to trust Robert again, waited with bated breath. "I was wondering," Robert continued, his voice soft but sure, "if you'd consider making this arrangement more permanent. Maybe we could look for a place together? A fresh start for all of us?" The kitchen fell silent, even Michael sensing the weight of the moment. Sarah's mind raced, memories of their past mingling with the hopes she held for their future. "Robert, she began, her voice trembling slightly. But before she could continue, Michael's small voice piped up. "Does this mean we'll all live together? Like a real family?" The innocence and hope in his question brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She looked at Robert, seeing the same emotion reflected in his gaze. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly, squeezing Robert's hand. "I think it does." Robert's face lit up with a joy that took Sarah's breath away. "Really? You sure?" Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. "I'm sure. It won't be easy, and we still have a lot to work through. But I want this. I want us." As Robert pulled her into an embrace, with Michael wrapping his arms around both of them, Sarah felt as though a missing piece had finally clicked into place. Later that evening, as they sat on the couch, Michael nestled between them as they watched a movie. Sarah caught Robert's eye over their son's head. The look they shared was one of understanding, of shared hopes and dreams for the future. But as the credits rolled and Michael drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt a flicker of unease. She gently extracted herself from the couch, motioning for Robert to follow her to the kitchen. "What is it?" he asked, concern etching his features. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Robert, before we take this next step, there's something we need to discuss. Something I've been putting off." Robert's brow furrowed. "You can tell me anything, Sarah. What's wrong?" Sarah's hand unconsciously went to her stomach, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Robert. His eyes widened in realization. "Sarah, you." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm pregnant, Robert. I found out a few weeks ago. I wasn't sure how to tell you, with everything else going on." Robert's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, joy, and then, to Sarah's surprise, fear. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, it's wonderful. But I can't help but think of how I failed you both last time. What if I—" Sarah stepped closer, cupping his face in her hands. "You're not that man anymore, Robert. We've both grown, both changed. This baby, it's a new beginning for all of us." As they stood there in the soft glow of the kitchen light, the sound of Michael's soft snores drifting in from the living room, Sarah and Robert faced the next chapter of their lives together. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges they had yet to face. But as they held each other, both of them placing a gentle hand on Sarah's still flat stomach, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together as a family. "What do you think?" Robert asked, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Sarah squeezed his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. It's perfect. I can already see Michael playing in that garden. As if on cue, Michael's voice piped up from behind them. Can we go inside now? Please? The real estate agent, a kind-faced woman named Linda, chuckled as she unlocked the front door. Of course, little man. Let's go explore your potential new home. As they stepped inside, Sarah felt a flutter in her stomach, partly from the baby growing within her, now visible beneath her flowing summer dress, and partly from the enormity of what they were doing. This wasn't just about finding a new house, it was about building a new life together. They wandered through the rooms, Michael's excited chatter echoing off the high ceilings. The house was spacious yet cozy, with plenty of character and charm. Sarah could already envision where their furniture would go, how they'd decorate the nursery, the memories they'd create within these walls. As they reached the master bedroom, Robert pulled Sarah aside while Michael continued his exploration with Linda. Sarah, he said softly, his eyes searching hers. I know we've come so far, but I need to ask, are you sure about this? About us? Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Despite all the progress they'd made, she knew Robert still carried the weight of his past mistakes. She placed a hand on his cheek, her touch gentle yet firm. Robert, listen to me. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't sure. Yes, we've had our struggles, but look at how far we've come. This house, this baby, it's a fresh start for all of us. Robert's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He placed his hand over hers, leaning into her touch. I promise you, Sarah, I will spend every day making sure you and our children know how much I love you. I'll never take this second chance for granted. Their moment was interrupted by Michael's excited shout from down the hall. Mommy! Daddy! Come see my room! They shared a laugh, the tension breaking. As they moved to join their son, Sarah paused in the doorway, a sudden wave of emotion washing over her. Robert, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we're home. The joy that spread across Robert's face was answer enough. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, mindful of her growing belly, and kissed her forehead. Yes, he murmured. We're home. Later that evening, as they sat on the steps of their soon-to-be new home, watching Michael chase fireflies in the twilight, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey to this moment had been long and often painful, but sitting here, with Robert's arm around her and their unborn child nestled safely within her, she knew it had all been worth it. Penny, for your thoughts? Robert asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Sarah smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. I was just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I never would have imagined we'd be here. Robert's arm tightened around her. I know. There were times I thought I'd lost you both forever. I'm so grateful for this second chance. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Sarah felt the baby kick, a strong, determined movement. She guided Robert's hand to the spot, watching his face light up with wonder. Hello there, little one, he whispered, his voice filled with awe. We can't wait to meet you. Michael ran up to them then, his hands cupped gently around something. Look what I caught, he exclaimed, opening his palms to reveal a softly glowing firefly. As they huddled together, marveling at the tiny creature's light, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was her family, imperfect, still healing, but bound together by love and the promise of new beginnings. The firefly took flight, its light blinking as it disappeared into the night sky. Sarah watched it go, a metaphor for the journey they'd been on, from darkness into light, from separation to reunion. As they gathered their things to leave, Sarah took one last look at the house that would soon be their home. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges yet to come. But whatever lay ahead, she knew they would face it together, as a family. With Michael's small hand in hers and Robert's arm around her waist, Sarah stepped forward into the warm summer night, ready to embrace the next chapter of their story. As she entered the room, Sarah paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. Robert stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with exaggerated flair, while Michael sat at the island, giggling at his father's antics. The sight filled her heart with warmth, but also a twinge of anxiety. "Good morning, my loves," she said, her voice betraying a hint of strain. Robert turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Sarah, you should be resting. Here, sit down." He rushed to help her onto a stool, his concern evident in every gentle touch. Sarah smiled, grateful for his attentiveness, but feeling a familiar restlessness creep in. "I'm fine, Robert. Really. I can't spend the next 2 weeks just lying around." Michael piped up, his mouth full of pancake. "But Mommy, Daddy says the baby could come any day now." Sarah ruffled her son's hair affectionately. "That's true, sweetheart. But until then, Mommy needs to keep busy." Robert set a plate of pancakes in front of her, his brow furrowed with worry. "I know you're restless, love, but please. Take it easy. For all of us." As Sarah opened her mouth to reply, sharp pain suddenly gripped her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her. "Anything.